Mă bucur mult că putem să discutăm despre succesul pe care îl are ficțiunea ca activitate, să spunem, pentru că în cazul lui Percy Brown este foarte important faptul că este un autor care s-a format scriind multe romane nepublicate, până la Furia Roșie, și este interesant în discuția noastră să atingem și zona asta de background, tot ce s-a întâmplat în jurul scrierii cărților lui până când a reușit să își vadă publicat prima carte. Vreau să începem, vreau să o întreb în primul rând pe Laura, care a tradus multe lucruri și din zona SF, dar și din afară. Aș vrea să o întreb cum a fost pentru ea întâlnirea cu acest roman Iron Gold.
A fost foarte interesantă. Bine, trebuie să spun că eu când am citit trilogia lui Pierce Brown, prima trilogie, nu mă așteptam să ajung să traduc vreo parte din ea. Am citit-o pur și simplu ca cititor, mi-a plăcut, m-a entuziasmat. Dar îmi place foarte mult unde a dus povestea acum în noua serie. Sunt convinsă că deja știți, acțiunea se petrece peste 10 ani de la Victoria, în ziua Victoriei, în care tirania este abolită și Republica și democrația își încep marșul triumfal, numai că marșul nu este foarte triumfal. În general, o problemă a acestor serii, fie că sunt science fiction, fie că sunt fantasy, este că ele sunt clădite către această zi a victoriei, după care se termină. Ori, în realitate, lupta nu se termină atunci, de multe ori lupta abia începe, pentru că Sauron sau Palpatine sau oricine, Lord Voldemort, nu sunt singuri, ei sunt susținuți de un sistem, ei au niște ajutoare, au niște locotenenți, să le zicem, care și ei aspiră la putere și care în lipsa, după moartea liderului lor, vor încerca fie să reziste, fie să obțină propria lor putere, fie să devină niște căpetenii mai mici războinice în micuțul lor regat și așa mai departe. Și cam asta se întâmplă și aici. Faptul că a fost detronată suverana Octavia Aulune nu înseamnă neapărat că gata, s-a terminat și totul este minunat. Nașterea unei democrații este de multe ori mai complicată decât doborârea tiranului. Aliații care până atunci au fost uniți de dragul cauzei comune descoperă că dintr-o dată au viziuni diferite despre cum trebuie să fie noua organizare. Sau în timpul bătăliei care a dus la victorie s-au întâmplat lucruri, unii au ales ceva, alții au ales altceva, unii au sacrificat niște chestii, alții n-au fost de acord cu asta și acum toate tensiunile astea încep să apară și oameni care înainte ar fi murit unii pentru alții, dintr-o dată încep să nu mai fie de aceeași parte, se pot pomeni chiar fără să vrea în tabere dușmane. Adevărul este că e un autor cu al cărui stil te împaci foarte ușor. Scrie direct, atunci când descrie ceva vezi ceea ce descrie, personajele sunt atașante, ajungi să ții la ele, ajungi să-ți pese de ceea ce li se întâmplă. E mult mai ușor să traduci când ești implicat sufletește în ceea ce se întâmplă decât atunci când te plictisești.
Ce titlu să aibă? Pentru că toate romanele au avut în engleză schimbări ca să există coerență în română.
Păi probabil că o să continuăm tot cu Furia de un fel sau altul, pentru că până acum toate s-au chemat Furia de un fel, Furia de altfel și ca urmare fiind în aceeași serie am putea continua. Provizoriu, întrucât eu sunt abia la jumătatea traducerii, mă gândesc să-i spunem Furia de fier și când veți citi veți vedea de ce. Pentru că deja Darrow nu mai este singurul furios, mai sunt și alții acolo care sunt furioși și uneori de sub poleiala de aur iese miezul de fier la iveală, ceea ce se va vedea.
You know, one of my favorite things about being an author is the benefits you find after you write the book. And I didn't expect this. I didn't think when I was writing a book that I would one day be sitting here having a translation in my ear. And I think that it's amazingly rewarding because when you create a book, you're working in isolation. It's a private project of your own insanity sometimes. And you're not really sure if it's good. You're not really sure if it'll ever be read or if it'll find a home. And to be honest, when I was writing Red Rising, I wasn't even sure more than 5 people would read it. And those are my initial readers. And so when I come on tour anywhere, it's an incredibly rewarding experience because what happens is this kind of strange phenomenon where the world becomes more real to me because I get to see it through the eyes of individuals who have lived a life completely separate from mine, have different perspectives on my characters, different perspectives on the world, yet somehow find a common thread to which we all which we all follow and which all interests us. And so when coming to Romania, I was excited to get the perspective of readers here, because you have dealt with systems of government that I have not in my life. You are a burgeoning young society of democracy. And this book is more relevant, I think, to Romania than it is almost to the United States in terms of its politics. And so that's kind of shown through. Because you have, my readership here is younger than it is in the United States. And I think that is symptomatic of the kind of burgeoning, how do I say this, free thinking, and also the sharing of information, but also the idea of following stories of hope, following stories of individual achievement. And when I wrote Red Rising, I was trying to find my own path in life. And it was amazing to find Darrow, someone who knew what he had to do, someone who knew he had to rise up against a system of oppression. And seeing that in Romanian readers as well, seeing that they have also found that something that's appealing, is heartwarming to me, and it's amazingly rewarding. The difference in who people like as a main character has been surprising to me. In the United States, almost unanimously, it's Severo. And here, it's more divided. And I find that a lot of Romanian readers like Mustang, for instance, or follow Darrow. And I think, right? And I think that I don't know the reason behind that, but I find that amazing, because Mustang I wrote after basing her off of my mom, because my mom is the smartest woman I know, and one of the most has reached the level of achievement that she wasn't born into. She came from a family of 10. Or actually 12 in rural Iowa, and like basically living out on a farm, and then became a CEO. And so we moved 8 times growing up, following her to different states. So I went to 12 different schools. And my mom has always been that kind of central figure of power in my life, but also wisdom in a way. Or cutting intelligence. My dad's more the wise one. My mom is just sharp. But my mom sometimes needs my dad to, be the slow and steady one. And so finding that Mustang is a popular character here has been one of the stark differences. My childhood heroes. God, I'm going to sound so American. George Washington. But here's why. Here's why. George Washington led an army that won a revolution. And then he became, they created a constitution, and they created term limits, so he could only be president twice. And at the end of his second term, people in Washington begged him to run for a third term. But he said, no, it's not in the Constitution. And he stepped down after that. And there was a line that said George Washington is one of the greatest figures in history because he's one of the only people that turned down power. And I think that is an incredibly moving thing. Because when everyone, even the learned senators with you, even the men who helped you win this war, tell you to take power and he doesn't, I think it established a precedent which allowed no other American president to seize power in a way. And so I loved that as a young age. And I used to grow up, or I lived in North Carolina for a while, and there was a battlefield that was in my backyard, so I was always digging up musket balls. And so, so I was out there with my metal detector. I was such a nerd. I was out there with my metal detector in the woods, like, ooh! And I'd be digging for musket balls. But every time my dad would make me take one of the musket balls, and he'd make me take it to the park rangers, the security there, and tell them I discovered this, because it wasn't mine. It was on, national park land. And every time the guard would say, you were honest, and they would give it back to me. So I know, my dad's awesome. But I was just, when I first had my first musket ball, I gave it to the guy, and I was like, don't take it, So I love George Washington. I liked Achilles as a kid, but when I grew up a little bit, I started seeing him more as a warning sign. I started seeing him more as a cautionary tale than anything else. I think, I look at Lauren and I'm like, he's so wise, but I wrote Lauren, so I'm telling myself I'm wise. So it's like, this is the problem. Yeah. I'll be like, as Lauren always said. You mean as you always say? Yeah. And that's the problem. There's a problem with writing your own books. Is you start because I love Lauren. Almost like he was a real person, and then he's not, and then I get upset. So it's kind of twofold. I was reading. I've always liked the Greek plays, and much of Red Rising is based in mythology. And I was reading the Greek play Antigone, And I was struck as I was rereading it, because you read it in school, but you kind of don't read it, yeah. And then I was rereading it later on, and I found how much I loved it, and I thought it was surprising because in Antigone, for those of you who've not read it, the titular character, Antigone's she had a brother who rose up in a rebellion, and the rebellion lost. And he died, and the tyrant of Thebes, a guy by the name of Creon, said that none who participated in the rebellion would be allowed to be buried. And in Greek culture at the time, that was a way of honoring your dead and honoring the gods by burying them and giving them funeral rites. And he forbade anyone to be buried. And he said anyone who buries any of the rebels will also be executed. And Antigone, as a sign of respect for her brother and realizing that this was a bad law, decided to bury her brother anyway, and she was killed for it. And I thought that was a remarkable sacrifice, and it was fascinating to me how the story of a girl 2,500 years ago has kind of transcended time. It's gone through time. In a period where in any other culture during that time, she would have been disenfranchised. She wouldn't have had any power. Yet her voice was strong enough to last that long. And I thought what a beautiful beginning of a rebellion that would be. And I wanted to expound on that because with her dead, you couldn't really have a main character. So where do I find my main character? And so in Antigone, she is engaged to a young man who is actually the tyrant's son. And he doesn't understand why she would do this, why she would die, and for what purpose. Because he only understood his love for her. He only understood that she was choosing something to be more important than him. And that is what Darrow struggles with throughout the first book. And then later on in the series, he comes to understand that young love can be selfish. You think that you should be the center of someone else's world, but then you realize that there are more important things out there. Love can inform you, it can make you, it can help shape you, but it shouldn't be the definition, perhaps, of your life. And he realized Io's sacrifice. And so I used Antigone and found that story to be so moving. But then I was also finding out that it was difficult to what world do I tell this in? And so I was mountain climbing with a group of friends. And to mountain climbing, you have to go in the early morning. So we're 5 a.m. on this icy slope, and we're using ice axes to go in. We're all tied together, and the stars are so bright you can almost touch them. And all I was thinking when I was going up there wasn't anything like amazing or romantic. I was just thinking how damn tired I was and how much I wished that the gravity was less. So I'm like, what planet has less gravity? I'm like, I wish I was hiking on Mars. And so then I started thinking about Mars and Antigone and the concept of that story kind of melding the ancient myths that I loved as a kid along with the science fiction that I loved as an adult. And the story started sprouting up from there, and the next day I started writing it. Yes, I knew people would have a reaction to it, but that's what I wanted to create. I've read a lot of books where there is no emotional reaction almost the entire book, and it's just the story of someone has a special power and then they become powerful. And they find a power within themselves in the final confrontation, and all of a sudden, they tap into something that they didn't even try to work on, and it just happens and they win. I don't like those stories because we've seen thousands of them. What I wanted to do was create something that was not YA, something that did not have a love triangle. When I was initially looking at it, I saw it, look at all these books with love triangles. How about I create a love triangle and then kill one of the corners of the triangle? And so I think it's more interesting when the love triangle is not necessarily, I can't choose between two very different people who are both stupidly handsome, It was more about how do I be a human being and love someone, Mustang, while being respectful to the woman I did love, and realizing there are different phases in your life, because I've loved different people in my life, and each time it feels like it's all-consuming, as though that's the only one you'll ever have. And I think that it's important to delineate the difference for young readers in particular, because I think that if you say that, if you create this idea of a love triangle, yes, there's tension and it's dramatic and things like that, but I think that it doesn't send a very positive message. I also think that it's somewhat unrealistic. And in my life, the hardest thing sometimes about getting over an old love is realizing that it's not an indictment on you. It's not your fault, and it doesn't say that you're not enough for them or that Darrow wasn't enough for Io. It's that she had different priorities, and he has to figure out what his are. So in killing Io so early on, it was emotional, yes, but I wanted that reaction from a reader because I think that a book that makes you react means you're interested and you're going to pay attention more throughout. Because if you're not going to react to something, or if you're not going to learn from something, then why do it? Time is precious, right? And the question throughout the series, and one of the reasons I wanted to tell this story is because I feel as though it's tempting to make this story one about vengeance, but what comes from vengeance? As Lord Aarchos, the wise man, says, death begets death begets death. And so what I wanted to show was death begets maybe life. And I wanted to show Pax at the end being this almost reward for Darrow for not taking the easy route of vengeance, for being someone who made sacrifices in order to try to compromise and try to be a builder. And I think that is more resonant, more interesting of a main character to ask him of that than simply killing the bad guy. Because the question all throughout Morning Star is, well, what next? And Darrow doesn't know, and he had to rely on Mustang for that. And I think that we start seeing the reasoning behind her fear throughout that book of who he is, what he does best, which is break things. And we start realizing that fear doesn't just come from a place of theoretical conversation. It comes from a place of a mother hoping that the man who fathered her son is something more than just a fighter, something more than just a breaker. Because I think that often, as was mentioned earlier, rebellions tend to have negative consequences and tend to fizzle out and tend to, just because someone is fit to destroy a tyranny or destroy or upseat a government doesn't mean that they should govern. And I think that was the first step to saying maybe he is fit, maybe he can. I look at Severo as in my way is he's the biggest fantasy of the book, because everyone should have a friend like that. Everyone should have a friend who has your back no matter what, who no one else understands. You see, I think he came from a childhood friend of mine by the name of Alex, who I grew up with a bit in Iowa, and he was this scrappy kid with teeth that were like this, jagged, and he had freckles everywhere, and bright red hair, and was stick thin, and he also couldn't swim. And he and I would just go out and build forts and shoot paintballs at people and do crazy things, but he always had my back. I remember I was in this fight when I was in fifth grade or something, and I was fighting this kid, and I was doing okay, and then Alex just jumps on his back and starts biting him, and I'm like, oh my God! And so it's just having that friend who always overreacts to protect you. I think everyone deserves that, and we don't always know how to treat that person. And I think that is an interesting relationship to explore with Darrow, because he takes him for granted at times. He abuses his trust at times. But he also realizes that's the only person at certain times he can be himself with. And in many ways, I think shipping them is the easy route, but I think that realizing that love is multifaceted, love can have many faces, love is what binds us together as hopefully as a society, but certainly as family networks. And so looking at their love, I look at it as that brotherly love and that family love, which is almost indescribable and certainly stronger than romantic love can be.
But I really love the books, and I was wondering, when are the movies going to come out?
Another question I've never been asked.
Really?
So originally it was going to be a movie with Universal Studios, and in recent days I've wanted to make it a TV show instead. So it was with Universal Studios, but I got the rights back and have been developing a TV show with a fantastic director who you guys will be wild about, whose name I can't tell you.
Oh.
Because we're still in the process of making the deal. That sounded very ominous. I'm making the deal. But I'm writing these scripts for TV right now, but I want it to be a TV series because I think that we can appreciate the characters more. I think that we can spend more time with them. We can learn more about the culture. We can have it exist in our lives longer that way. And when writing the scripts for Universal, I realized about half the characters didn't make it into the book, into the movie. And that's simply a constraint of, it's a factor of me having so many damn characters, but it's also difficult because there's not enough screen time. And why would I want to force it down this narrow corridor when there's other options available? And I think TV will give us 10 hours to explore those characters per season. And that's much more fun. So hopefully soon. Because writer's block for me doesn't come because I don't know what to do. It comes from the fact that I can't choose what to do. So I'll have so many different options, and sometimes I don't know which path to go down. And often that indecision is based on me not knowing what I want to show you or how to show it.
And aren't you sometimes torn apart between these decisions?
Oh yeah. And there's no answer for it. I mean, you can go running, you can play with your, I just hold my dog, I hold my dog on the couch and hope she gives me inspiration. Instead, she just gives me fur. And I sometimes go running, I sometimes go hiking, I'll sometimes watch my favorite movies, but the real answer is to just take a piece of paper. If you're writing on the computer, get a piece of paper and start writing. Because then you have no attachment to it. And this is the same advice I give first-time writers or new writers who are writing their first books, is to not be afraid of making a mistake. Because what happens is when you get writer's block, you're deep into your story, or perhaps you're at the beginning, and you're so afraid of making a mistake and you're walking on ice, very thin ice, but you're going very slowly, and then you just stop and you lose all momentum. But the key is, I really meant that. The key is to continue to have momentum, and it's much like a hell diver, velocity is everything. And so what I do is I try to create that flow, try to create that momentum by, if I write on paper, then all of a sudden I'll be writing crap. It won't be good, but I won't be paying attention to being good because I'll be so excited about, or trying to get into the mode of like making a decision in which direction it goes. And about halfway down the page, almost always I'll be like, I'm being an idiot. Like I should just write it, and then I just go up there and write it. Or I'll skip it. I'll skip that section and I'll just bounce ahead. And then once I know where I have to go, I'll know where I need to have been. So I like writing the jackal, which is interesting. I think that the entire process is that way. It helps me understand my own political opinions, but also helps me, I think, see from other people's perspectives, particularly the new series where we have 4 perspectives, and each one of them is built to reflect upon Darrow. They have different perceptions of him, and I was eager to get into their voices, and I was initially a little bit hesitant to write the character of Lyria, who you'll come to know, because she is a 16-year-old girl who is a red from the mines, and I am not, or never have been, a 16-year-old girl. So I know, contrary to popular opinion. And so I was a little bit nervous about writing her perspective, but then I found when I put it down on page, it was easier than any of the others, because I was able to find commonalities between me, but also the differences. And I love jumping into her skin, so to speak. And so I think it taught me a lot of things in terms of how she would respond to people in her life. And what that does when you're thinking about it in the real world, when you think about it in the book world, is one thing, but then you start seeing it in real life, and it helped me become more empathetic, I think. Rewriting. So you're never writing in concrete. You're not creating a marble statue where every chink you make could be a fatal mistake. And so if I find he's in an impossible situation, I look at this situation and I think, is this an interesting situation? And if it is interesting, then I'll go back and rewrite the earlier parts so that you can see the seeds of how he would get out of that situation. And so that's what makes it fun to write like that, because you'd be like, wow, this is tense. Wait, how can I lay breadcrumbs along the way that make you realize that he could find a way out? Because there's always a logical connection back to several things before whenever they get out of a situation. It's not like realizing some untapped potential. It's not Darrow suddenly realizing he can outdo Elijah because he can't, It would be like, I think that you have to maintain the rules you set up. So finding a way for it to and this is why it's cool and why I like it, is because there's rules that are set up and you can't break those rules. Now, a lot of times there's in stories where they break the rules, and it frustrates me because then it's like, all right, so there's never tension because they can just break rules. So it's cool to get in that situation because you know the rules that are around them, you know the rules that cannot be broken, especially this long into the series. So then you have to find, according to those rules, how would they logically get out? And I'm not saying it's easy. I spent a good long while trying to figure out how Darrow got out of the table, because I'm like, he's in the table. Now what? Because they wouldn't just let him go off with one guard, He'd always be surrounded by the equivalent of like a Navy SEAL, like 12 men. So how do you get out of that situation? And so you find the routes, and often it creates more interesting storytelling than if you knew all the way through.